Okay, so let's talk about creating idols specifically. Okay, so when you're crafting your actual idol, I like to think about it in a couple sort of mechanical stages. The first thing is get inspired, right? Get reference, have that vision of what you want to do. The next is to start crafting the actual animation. So the first thing you want to think about is the base loop. So generally, it's going to be some kind of breathing cycle. Maybe it's kind of like a back and forth thing to it. Maybe it's kind of like alternating between tensing and relaxing. But you want something that can loop well, that just forms like the ground texture for it. So if we look at some of these examples, okay, so some elements you want in your base loop. This is just a simple breathing loop, but there's some things that are working nicely about it. First of all, there's nice overlap. So you can see the hips are driving the up-down motion, and then the spine, kind of upper spine, is following with some drag. And then you're getting the arms kind of really delayed, especially on the up. And the fact that they're kind of more delayed on the up than the down is good as well. That makes it feel more natural. So the inhale and the exhale, it'd be nice if they feel a little bit different. It'll feel more lifelike. Another thing that's working well about this is there's layers, what I like to call layers of motion. So there's kind of the up down as one layer, and then there's a different layer of motion that's this head shake on the exhale, right? And you could say that mouth open and close is kind of part of the up down layer. It's just two poses, basically, open and closed, with maybe some ease in on some of them, right? But you have a different kind of frequency of keys on the head. The head does this left, right, left, right, left, right on the exhale, and then it calms down for the inhale. It does kind of like a slow jiggle. And those two things complement each other. It keeps it interesting. And then you have that third layer, which is just this like jingling earrings, right? And that just kind of, again, it keeps it lifelike and interesting to have these different layers that are moving at different frequencies. So you don't just have an offset up down on everything. You have different things going on. This is still all base loop, right? We're not seeing any fidgets or variation. Still just an up down short cycle. Here's an even simpler one. There's not a lot of layers going on here, but in terms of the basic up down, there's just kind of a little bit of a nice contrast between how it goes up and then how it goes down, especially kind of registering it in the jaw, right? So the jaw kind of stays open for most of it, but it just drags up as the head is falling down. And because it's it is a little bit of a different frequency and timing than the body, it contrasts it kind of nicely. Right, there's also a little bit of kind of roll happening in the spine, which is helpful. You're getting a little bit more kind of the circular motion on this shoulder pad, which is also adding some interest. This is one of my old WildStar animations. It's called Metal Maw. But again, this is like a base loop, and there's different layers going on. So there's the up down, and it's actually two up downs with a little bit of a left right that happens over the two. So you could maybe call that a base loop, or you could maybe call that a little bit of macro variation, but it's not much. It's basically just two breaths with a sway left and right. The main reason for this is because of the tail, because I wanted that tail to go back and forth kind of slowly. And that's why I doubled it up. You guys are also going to have tails. So I also recommend doubling it up, for your base idol for that purpose. But you can also see there's like kind of this wiggly motion happening on the tongue. That's kind of a different frequency. The jaw's kind of shaking a little bit back and forth. The gun is doing these little twitchy kind of fidgets. There's a motor that's vibrating. These little mandible things are kind of flicking once during the animation. So I'm just trying to keep different things moving in different ways. as well as just that general overlap, right? Overlap is going to be a big theme, as we're working with these creatures. Everything really should be overlapping. Okay, so the next kind of thing you can do is macro variation over like 3 to 6 loops. You have a good basic breath. What type of variation can you then do? Now this is kind of an example that does go a little bit far with the variation, but essentially, I would say they most likely created that base loop first, that breathing up down with that circular motion, right? That's happening on the spine and on the head. And then they duplicated it 4 times and they added some variation over those 4 cycles. And the thing that I think makes this loop pretty well is they have kind of like a rise and a fall, like a slow rise and a fall to the intensity of what it's doing. And every base loop, each of the 4 base loops has something different that it does. So the first one has like this nose wiggle. The second one has 2 steps forward. The third one has a roar. And the fourth one has 2 steps back. Right? So it's got this nice kind of like even stepping forward, holding, stepping back, holding, and then something different happens on each loop as well. Right? They're not kind of repeating a fidget multiple times. Now this is a more extreme example. Now this one, again, they probably made that basic breathing cycle because and the tail wag, because you can kind of see it playing under everything. And then they added a lot of fidgeting over, I don't know, it's like 30 or 40 of these breaths. And I think something that's important, because it's a loop, is that it's kind of always moving. It's not like standing still for a long time and then doing something big and then standing still for a long time and then doing something big. As a result, you don't really feel that cycle point. It's actually kind of hard to tell when it's repeating. Because it's always doing something. There's a lot of different things it's doing. They're all kind of similar intensity. And it's not like every breath, there's some variation to the pacing. But you can see like the first thing it does is these head twitches. Then it kind of like chews at its arm. Then some more head twitches. Then it kind of takes a bite at its other arm. Then it looks left, looks right. Right, then it kind of scratches its shoulder and kind of eats the whatever bugs out of his hand that he pulled off. So it's just kind of always moving, and I think it kind of hides the loop nicely. Now, the other way to do true fidgets is, to separate the animations. So, if you take Street Fighter, for example, right, they have their base loop, and then they have like a big fidget that they also use to change poses. Right, and it is a common thing to do. It's helpful if that base loop has some life to it, if it's not just really obviously standing still. But you can see there, kind of a big fidget that randomly plays. Then she goes back. And I think these are actually really good examples of base idols that have life and variation to them, like macro variation, without getting super expensive. So let's mostly look at this guy. So there's a basic breath cycle. It's got a left-right for each breath. But over the duration, there's also just little eye looks that are happening. And I think that's the only macro variation they've done on this. You're kind of looking away so you can't see it. This is a separate fidget that is played, separate idle. But now that it gets back into this, you can see these little eye looks, right? I think this one has a little bit more going on. It's got these little head tilts, a blink. Right now it's doing that separate animation. But once it gets back into the idle, you can see there is some variation, right? There's a blink, those head twitches, exactly. So just those little bits of macro variation really do a lot to break up the idle. and they're so easy to make. So I'd really encourage you guys, getting that base loop good is the top importance. But even then, just add a little bit of macro variation over 5, 6 cycles, whatever, just to get like a blink, a couple little head looks, some eye darts, that kind of stuff. Right? Just those little looks add so much, and they're so easy.